Dickson, founder of Bus Business Consultants and author of Transportation Insights. For decades, lists like 40 Under 40 have celebrated the rising star. Bus business while still in high school back in 1967. He's never left. He owned and operated Pacific Coast Bus Service, still owned Trans-Cal, went on to lead the San Francisco market. Embodies the spirit of this industry. I had the privilege of working alongside him years ago, and I'm honored to reconnect and share his journey. This is Mike, thanks so much for joining me today. The idea behind this series is to honor leaders such as yourself who've been in ground transportation for, in your case, 58 years. My goal is to capture your story, your lessons, and your advice for the next generation. Let's start at the beginning. So tell us how you first got into the industry and what has made you stay for 58 years.
Yeah. Where do we start? I'll answer the staying part first. I think in this industry, anybody that's been around this long's got to have something wrong in the back of the brain here, but I digress. So I started in the industry in 1967. I was a sophomore in high school.
Wow.
And my uncle, Billy, had started a bus company, had worked at a bus company in San Francisco when he got out of the Marine Corps. Prior to 1966, he worked for a bus company called Barrett Transportation. And Barrett operated the contract with San Francisco Airport to run scheduled bus service between downtown San Francisco and San Francisco International Airport. He worked there a couple of years and decided in 1966 to start his own bus company. So he bought an ex-Greyhound 4103 with a Detroit diesel 671 and a 4-speed Spicer transmission and no power steering, no restroom as well. But anyway, he asked me the following year if I'd like to do a part-time job and clean buses for him. That sounded, for a 15-year-old kid, to be a lot sexier than delivering newspapers and having to try to chase my money down by collecting. I did that and did that through high school, did that through college, and stuck with me a while.
Just a little bit.
So I started out with a broom and a mop and learned how to fuel a bus, service the restrooms, and then eventually worked into the shop, changing oil and doing maintenance, grease jobs, changing tires. I became pretty good at breaking down those split rim tires back there and with inner tubes, and just learned a little. We had a mechanic that worked there, and I learned a lot from him. And so I spent quite a bit of time working in the shop. And then when I turned 18, kept working in the shop, but got my commercial driver's license when I turned 18. And I think drove until actually about 2 years ago, I turned back my commercial license. But I think over my career, I probably drove 300,000 or 400,000 miles during that time, but enjoyed it. I stayed with my uncle there until 1977. He sold the company, Franciscan Lines in San Francisco. And about 6 months later, he called me and said, I'm going to start another bus company. Would you like to come in as a partner? He and I started a company called Trans-Cal Tours, and I did that with him for about 9 years. In that course of time, had 2 kids, and enjoyed that immensely. Enjoyed the thought of being an owner. And 1987, I left. My uncle is still alive, 20 years older than I am. And we had a few differences of opinion on how to deal with business. So I left. Initially wanted to buy him out, and that unfortunately didn't work out. But started my own company, Pacific Coast Bus Service, in 1987, and operated that through my sale of the company in 2004 to Coach America. That's where I met Brian. And I was tired of being the last man on call. Numerous nights of up in the middle of the night, found on road calls or a road call for somebody else, another company. We always did outside maintenance for bus companies visiting San Francisco, but did that until 2004. And I wanted at that time to be a part of something bigger. And starting at Coach America, I thought really that I had died and gone to heaven. I went from having 13 buses, and I think we had about 25 employees, to 100. I think we had 106 buses when I started and 160 employees. And so going through an experience, a radical change from doing everything yourself to having people that were very good at what they did and specialists in their own departments, operations, maintenance, charter sales, accounting. I enjoyed the heck out of it and went through that through their bankruptcy in 2012 and came on board with my current employer, Coach USA. Again, I've continued that, my enjoyment in working with other people.
Yeah, I agree with you. I certainly don't have the time that you have with Coach USA, but enjoyed working for Coach America. At the time you and I worked there, after a couple of acquisitions, I think it was in the 2007, 2008 timeframe. Coach America, for those who may not know, was the largest private charter company in the country. I think we had this number two amount of coaches next to Greyhound, but obviously Greyhound's a little bit different business than Coach America was. So yeah, it was a good company and a lot of good people. And definitely, I know you and I both share the same point of view that it's too bad that things didn't work out because
Yeah.
we both enjoyed working there. As you look back over nearly 6 decades, what were some of the biggest turning points or changes that stand out to you?
Probably one of the first one that comes to mind is the advent of, or the increasing advent of the automatic transmission.
Wow.
I learned to drive a bus, and it was a 1948 4103, bus number 102 was the bus that I used to get my driver's license. I learned one of the drivers being tired of asked by a young kid, "Can you please move the bus to the fuel rack?" And on a day where my uncle wasn't there, he said, "I'm going to teach you something, Mike." And so that was, I became an expert at maneuvering around buses and oddly enough, sign poles in the yard.
Mhm.
And on at Third and Illinois Street in San Francisco, where we had a big billboard sign that one leg of it came down into the yard. So it got pretty good at that. And then, so oddly enough, I had driven more in a bus in that yard than I had when I was 16, getting my driver's license and going to the DMV and do the drive test there. I was more nervous doing that in a car than I was in driving a bus around the yard as a kid. But so that was probably a big thing. And as time went on, and more automatic transmissions means you didn't have to have a driver that knew how to double clutch and drive a stick shift. And especially in the days when the GMCs were it as far as motor coaches. I mean, we started out with, I bought GMCs 4107s, 4905s, and anybody that's old enough remembers that driving that, you had to be wide awake when you came to work in the morning because you had to be totally focused on shifting that thing, especially when that Spicer transmission was cold. Quick reflexes and a good ear listening to the engines, no tachometers there. But so you went with that. And so those are probably two of the biggest changes through my experience.
Wow. Okay. You probably didn't have to worry about falling asleep while you were essentially wrestling the bus
Yeah.
to drive it. And I assume driving it in San Francisco, it's not like you were, I'm sure there was some over the road type work, but also a lot of intracity work.
Oh yeah, there's nothing like God, especially when we got into the MCIs, MC7s, where first gear was a high gear anyway. And the Eagle buses later on were the stick shifts were even higher first gear. So trying to take off on a hill going up O'Farrell Street in San Francisco, either doing an airport transfer or a city tour. The key then was to make sure if you were on one of those steeper hills, you wanted to make sure the front axle was over the crown of the hill. You were probably into the crosswalk by then, but at least that gave you a little bit of an advantage moving from a dead stop to continue on.
Hopefully, it would help you make sure you didn't roll back.
Oh yeah, yeah. And so in those days, still working in the shop, I got pretty good. And my brother, at the time when I started the Pacific Coast, was a partner of mine. But even back to the earlier days, Transcal tours, we got pretty good at changing clutches. I think the record was an hour. We changed a clutch in a 4905. The bus company was from New York. It was called Aven Tours. And they did a series in San Francisco and in California back in the day. Get in at 6 o'clock in the morning, get the bus jacked up, get the transmission out, the clutch changed, and an hour later the bus was out of the shop rolling again.
Wow, it's incredible. You've told us a lot about your background and how you started washing buses and you worked on buses and you've obviously driven, you said almost 500,000 miles. But at some point, you made that transition into being a leader and you obviously owned your own company and were a VP and GM and for Coach America for many years. From all of these experiences that you've told us about, and I'm sure many that you haven't told us about, what are some of the lessons that really have stuck with you as a leader?
Probably as a leader, it's employees. No matter how good of a manager you may be, it takes people to run the business. And the employees are individuals. They live their own lives. There's work, and then there's your home and your family life, and they are critical to any operation. So as a leader, you got to understand that. And individuals are individuals, and they have their own way of looking at life and their own way of how important they think their job is. But at the root of it, they're individuals. So for managers throughout my career, especially in operations, is trying to get them to understand that they have to know the people that report to them. And you've got to make sure that every day that they are not only fit to drive, but they come into work with a positive attitude. I have told numerous people all over the years when you greet everybody as they come into the office, how are you this morning? And you can tell when people tell you I'm fine from their tone, they're not. And as Brian and I have talked over the course of our reconnecting, you want people to go to work that are happy. So the start is making sure that you treat your employees because they're the key. I don't care how good a salesman is or how good an owner or a manager is. People don't see you. You're not the interface. The driver on that side of life is the interface. So the happier they are, the more that they understand what your philosophy is toward the customer, because the customer is king. An owner of a bus company that ain't got any customers has got nothing. The customer is key. Customer is not always right. And over the years, I've had instances when a customer's trying to get a driver to do something that is not possible, is not legal, whatever the situation may be. The road is too narrow, their trees are too low, whatever the case might be. And I've told drivers over the years, either on the radio or the next was about as high tech as I got in that line. If you don't feel comfortable telling them no, I'll talk to them. And I never ever allowed a driver to be put in a situation where he felt that he was being pressured to do something that he knew that was wrong. And they all knew that if you're doing what I would do, I'm behind you 1,000%. And at that point, as I said, customer's not always right.
They're not
So
always right, but they are always your customer. So
they're always a customer. Yeah, yeah.
absolutely. Mike, we've said this a couple of times. You've got 58 years in the industry. What has kept you motivated and committed? You've had multiple times when you sold your company to Coach America, when Coach America filed for bankruptcy. I'm sure there's probably been a few times over there in the 13 years when you worked at Coach USA where you may have had opportunities to exit. So you've had multiple opportunities to exit and you've chosen to stay. So with nearly 60 years in the industry, what has kept you motivated and wanting to get up and continue to work to this very day?
I think again, for the same reason that I wanted to sell the company. Number one, the timing was right for that. But I like being a part of something bigger. I have always enjoyed my role here at Coach USA for the past 13 years, even though it's gone through some ownership changes. But it's always being part of something bigger than myself. Over the years, the more experience I've gained the trust of the people that I work for, that I enjoy doing different things. In my past life, I oversaw the 120 some odd bus stop cities that we operated under the megabus side of things. Right now, I'm involved in a project in Canada and another project in Mexico. So it keeps me excited and interesting. But I think the key thing is I love the people that I work with. At that stage of things, it didn't matter who owned the company, but it was the people I work with now, the gentleman that I report to now, it was there 13 years ago when I started. And I've enjoyed seeing over the period of time where I started working for a bunch of young singles. Now they're parents and they've got three, four, five kids, whatever the case might be. I enjoy that kind of stuff. So it's really the people. And while in my current role, I'm not on the ground with operations and with maintenance and all that. I loved those times. I really felt that being engaged in part of their life and being interested in what made them tick. Yeah, I felt I enjoyed that connection. I had a maintenance manager in San Francisco at Coach America that if we had my rule was that if we had a breakdown, we had some kind of an issue, I didn't care what day of the week it was, didn't care what time of night it was, I needed to know about it. And for example, it took me a while for some new dispatchers to not call me Mr. Waters. I kept saying until I lost my dad that, no, that's my dad. I'm Mike. But to get comfortable with calling me, and they wouldn't call me with silly stuff. They would call me with, if they had a problem and I could help, I wanted to help.
Yeah.
My maintenance manager in San Francisco would feel crushed when we had a breakdown over the weekend. And he'd be, when I would come into work, I usually came in early. He's sitting in the chair next to my office door. And I knew that something had gone wrong. I usually knew about it, number one. But I had to convince him that this is not an earth-shattering issue. If anything's made of more than two parts, something's going to break.
Yes.
And so my key triggers were, could we have found that in the last inspection? And how did we recover from it? Those were the two things for me. So the recovery, was it something that we could fix on the road? What was the delay? And then again, from operations, how did we deal with this? Eventually, it didn't take all that long to get them to understand if we had a breakdown. Those were the two things. Did we miss something in an inspection? Was, for me, was the key.
Yeah. Was it preventable?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And that's a key learning. I asked that question earlier about lessons and that look for root causes and look for opportunities to prevent things from happening before they happen.
Yep.
But to your point earlier, it's a mechanical piece of equipment. It's not a matter of if it's going to break down, it's a matter of when. And I think our customers and our guests, they understand that things are going to happen. What you also said is key is it's how you respond to that and how you recover from it. That is the key. A couple more questions for you. This next question is, we talked a little bit earlier about the idea came from the 40 under 40. So if you were sitting down with one of those 40 under 40 leaders, what advice would you pass along to them?
Well, two key components, I think, in the business is the employee, people that are doing the work, and the customer. So on the employee side of things, it's the fact that they are individuals, they have lives, if they have families, they've got lives to live. This is a job as a means to an end. And I learned early on, after I went to work for Coach America, I had a dispatcher try to pull back a driver's leave to attend one of their children's graduations. And I just happened to walk into that and diffused the situation, assured the driver, you're attending that. And I got the dispatcher to understand how important that is. Covering a couple of things from a dispatcher, and this has always been a bugaboo of mine over time. The driver's got a life to live. It doesn't matter whether it's an unannounced death, a graduation, whatever it is, they put off for it. Obviously, not a death, you don't. But once something like the graduation or the need to attend a funeral, that type of thing, or have a leave. And these things always seem to happen in the busiest times of year. But if you don't care about your employee enough, they're gone. They're either going to be gone or they're going to destroy your company internally. So, and again, you put yourself in their shoes. So the things that were always important to me was care for the employee, and the dispatcher is the main contact. I am not as the manager. And so that dispatcher has to understand what, number one, especially with a new driver, what are their capabilities? When I came in coach in America in San Francisco, there it was getting to know the drivers myself and understand how long they've been with the companies, what kind of work do they do. And it would always come up in wintertime. I would always sit down Friday afternoon with dispatch and see who's assigned for the weekend or what are they doing. In wintertime, it was ski trips, and seeing a driver's name on there that I know had not been to the snow, did not know how to put chains on. The response I initially got would be they went through chain class when they were hired 4 years ago.
That doesn't mean they know what they're doing.
In the yard. And so I got them to understand pretty quick that's not called experience. Putting the right people on to the right job, and not taking the philosophy of filling it with a warm body. That nothing would set me on edge and over the top. And having somebody tell me after the Mike, I've never heard you talk like that. Those things are important. And so trying to get operations to understand what limitations there may be and take care of that. The other thing is to understand the importance of the customer, because without the customer, we got nothing. We got buses, we got drivers, we got a shop. If we ain't got customers, we ain't got anything.
Got a whole lot of debt.
And a lot of debt, that's right.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
right.
No way to pay it off.
Oh, yeah. So it's a juggling act at times. Always try to get the driver I want them to understand that if they did what I would have done in the situation, it may have turned out awful. But if I could honestly say, under those circumstances, I'd have probably done the same thing. My philosophy was you did no wrong.
Yeah.
And figuring I had plenty of experience and I'd been through a lot of the good, the bad, and the ugly of the business, you have to get the driver to understand that if you acted right, and I want him to think, it would be, what would Mike do in a situation like that? If he would have done the same ththing I would have, I'm behind him 100%. So once you gain that trust from the employee, then he's going to think the right way when he makes a decision and feel that he's safe in doing that.
Well, that goes back to what you talked about earlier about getting to know your employees. And when we say that, we're not just talking about matching faces to names. We're talking about getting to know. Do they have a family? Like you said, what are their strengths and weaknesses? When you ask them how they're doing, you genuinely are asking because you genuinely want to know, and you know when something's off, and that's key. So I think that's a valuable lesson, and that goes back to what you were talking about when it's really get to know your drivers. And you said something else that was interesting too. You used the example of the driver who you knew were going into the mountains of the snow and had been through training, but had never been to the snow. I think that's another valuable lesson. We talked about what was the breakdown preventable. In that case, it was you're anticipating that driver's going to have some problems. And it could be just as simple as he doesn't know how to put his chains on. It could be much more serious. It could be a safety issue. It could also be lead to a negative guest or customer experience. And so that's preventable as well by making sure that you're not putting a driver that doesn't know what they're doing on a move in that sort of environment. So that's a great lesson, Mike.
Yeah, from my early days, when we got ICC authority back then to go from San Francisco to Reno, they gamble in the wintertime as well. So I went on the very first trip that I went to Reno in the wintertime. I had been for years teaching drivers how to put on chains in the yard. So my first time up there, it was the realization hit me that I sure got to hope that what I preached will actually work in practice. And again, driving over Donner Summit and in the mountains a lot, and in the driving years that I spent doing that, I found out early on from an older driver, you really know you're doing a good job when you're coming back from Reno on a Sunday afternoon and you got a load of senior citizens, and those heads that are leaning into the aisle, they're asleep, opposed to having all of those heads looking down at the driver, trying to figure out what the hell's he doing up
Right.
there. That really gave you that was the gauge of whether you were driving safely and comfortably or not.
Yeah, that makes sense. One more question for you, Mike. As you look ahead, what do you hope this next generation, whether it's the 40 under 40 or whether it's folks who are just getting into the business, what do you hope they do with what your generation and my generation is handing off to them? What do you hope they do with the industry's future?
Both from a management and an operational end, mechanics and drivers, and everybody is that it's serious business. We're not like the lone truck driver pulling 80,000 pounds of lettuce. Unfortunately, we saw the accident back east with a driver that for some reason makes an illegal turn on the highway across a median, and we have three people killed. How does that happen? It's called an off ramp and an overpass to get back onto an on ramp again. Why anybody would think of doing that is beyond comprehension. But it's serious stuff. And that goes from the mechanic doing the repair and inspecting the bus to the driver doing the pre-trip. I'll do a little side thing here. What I would do is I would have the shop take off the inner tire, the inner dual, put the outer on, and see if that got caught. And that was an eye opener to the driver who didn't pick that up.
Yeah.
And we'd come back into dispatch. How about that right inside dual? No, I checked that, walk them out there and say, not even there. This is safety stuff. This is people's lives we're dealing with, not only from the safety side of things, but from the operational, the customer service side of things. The driver that I would always tell people, if you got personal problems at home, if you can come to work today and be effective, we want you here. If that's bothering you so much, I'd rather have you stay at home. I don't want you bringing your problems to the customer who's got an expectation of service. And again, understanding and knowing the people that work for you. When you can pick up that how are you doing this morning? Oh, I'm doing okay. You know that there's something going wrong, and then let's delve into it a little more. Is this something you want to talk about, or yeah, there is. Yeah, I'm having problems at home. If you got time, let's come in and speak about it. I'll tell you the story, and maybe a little more apropos in this day and age. Back at Coach America, we had a female driver that was going through transition to become a male. So she comes back in the office, and I had an open door policy. And can I talk to you? And so we went through it. She was in tears and upset and didn't know how her career there would be if she went from being a Michelle to a Michael. And who teaches her how to deal with stuff like that? But it's basic. It's humanity. It's empathy. It's trying to put yourself in their shoes and how would you feel type of thing. So a long conversation. She went out there. She was happier going out than she came in. She had more confidence that she had a future there. So these are the things you have to deal with. And because at the end of the day, you want to make sure that the customer is satisfied, but you want the driver that comes into work to be glad that he's coming into work and they're gonna give their best and they can go home and feel satisfied that they, number one, they got an honest day's pay for an honest day's job, and their concern all the time is the company and the customer.
Great words of wisdom there, Mike. Listening to your story. The industry's come a long way in nearly 60 years, from manual transmissions to it's very possible we may see a time when vehicles drive themselves. Not today, but it's also a much more complex industry than it's ever been. The barriers to entry between the vehicle cost and insurance costs and things like that are much greater now. But there's also tons of opportunity. It's amazing for me, having been in the industry and then somewhat leaving the industry, going back to Disney and working in transportation there, and then coming back into the industry last year. Still in transportation the whole time, but not in the coach business. It's amazing to me to see how technology is now being leveraged in many different facets of the business. I'm sure you agree. I certainly hope that this next generation continues to look at what we do and embrace the core things like taking care of your employees and taking care of the customers, but also tries to hopefully is able to solve some of the challenges we have with the cost of equipment and the cost of insurance, and continuing to look for new ways to do things from a technology adoption perspective.
Oh, geez. I mean, from the days when I started, when you just talk the regulation side of life, I mean, it's wild.
Yeah, it is.
It went from days with filling your logbook out with a pencil because it had an eraser to the days to current times when you've got cameras in the bus, you've got electronic monitoring, GPS monitoring. There's no hiding. So you got to do it right. That starts an operation and goes out to the driver.
Those are great tools to have. In some ways, it's easier to be a leader now than it has been in the past, but they're great tools, but you also have to use those tools. I've worked for companies before where they make the investment in the tools, but then their leaders don't actually use the tools. And I always said that's worse. It's better to not have it than to have it and not use it.
And when the DOT and the state enforcements get in there and they see that you haven't been using it,
Yeah.
you've been overlooking these violations, there's a price to pay for that.
Well, Mike, it's been a privilege to spend some time with you here today, hearing your reflections on your nearly 60 years in the business. It's clear that your impact on our industry has been lasting and it's been meaningful, and it continues to this day. I appreciate your time today. I appreciate your service to our industry. And I appreciate those of you who are watching. And thank you for tuning in. Hopefully, you've been able to get something out of this conversation. Again, Mike, I just appreciate you spending some time with me here today and sharing your insights.
My pleasure. It's been a great industry. It's been great to me and my family, and worldview side of things. We move a lot of people, and we do it safely. Yeah, and that takes hard work and commitment from a lot of people. So it's the mechanics and the drivers. Over the years, the philosophy was that they didn't like drivers because drivers broke it and they had to fix it. But those times have changed now, and it's called teamwork. Now we work together to get the same thing done, which is to safely move a lot of people every year.
Yes. I heard at the Bus Industry Safety Conference that I went to in Minneapolis last month that, and this is an ABA stat, that our industry moves over 400 million people annually. If the population of people we move annually were a country, it'd be the third largest country in the world, bigger than the United States. So yeah, the impact that we have on our society is incredible.
And that should give people that work in our industry in every phase of it something to be proud of.
Absolutely. Thank you again, Mike. I appreciate your time. Thank you again also for those of you who watched at home. And I encourage you to continue to tune in. If you're not a subscriber to my Substack, if you're watching this video, you've made it this far, you probably have made it to my Substack. So please do me a favor and subscribe so you can get this content on a weekly basis, as well as access the archive for all of the other content that's been produced throughout the year. Thanks again for watching. Thanks again, Mike. And we'll talk to you again soon.
My pleasure, and safety rules.